19,000. Burn that number into your brain. Because by the end of this video, that number is going to mean something completely different than what the internet told you it meant. 19,000 copies. That is what Rick Ross moved in week 1 of Set in Stone, the 12th album of a 20-year career. And within hours, 50 Cent was on Instagram, doing what 50 Cent does better than any human being who has ever touched a social media app. Laughing, posting, circling the wounded like a shark that can smell blood through a phone screen. LOL, I'm sorry, it's over. That was the post. 3 words and an apology that was not an apology. But here is what nobody covering this story bothered to ask. Why did Rick Ross answer the worst sales week of Rick Ross' entire career by opening the doors of a private airplane hangar to Complex and smiling? Think about that. Your album just posted the lowest first week number you have ever seen. Your oldest enemy is dancing on the grave in real time. And your response is not a statement, not a diss track, not a tearful sit down. Your response is a guided tour of the most expensive room in Miami. So stay right here. Because what is actually happening between Rick Ross and 50 Cent right now is not a rap beef. It is not even really about album sales. It is 2 completely opposite philosophies of wealth, ego, and survival colliding in public. And both men are winning in a way the comment sections completely missed. Let me show you the receipts. First, the scene. Rick Ross calls the place the Eagle's Nest, a hangar in Miami. And calling a hangar almost feels disrespectful, because what is inside looks less like storage and more like a museum built by a kid who finally got the credit card. Rows of luxury cars lined up like soldiers. Custom motorcycles, including pieces tied to poor Miami era and Miami Dolphins colors. Arcade machines. Retro video game consoles. Collectibles stacked everywhere the eye lands. And parked at the center of the whole operation, a private jet with one very famous rule. No shoes on the jet. If you are not the boss, you feel the boss. That is the rule. You better believe it. Now here's the part that matters. When Complex asked Rick Ross why the collection exists, Rick Ross did not talk about money. Rick Ross talked about peace. The exact words were that collecting is me at peace, me having me time, me having somewhere I want to come when I just want to spend time alone. The man the internet spent all week calling broke, washed, finished, standing in the middle of millions of dollars of machinery, describing the whole thing as therapy. And the childhood detail is where this stops being a flex and starts being a story. Rick Ross admitted that growing up, the money was not there. The games, the consoles, the cars. All of it lived behind store glass. Rick Ross described walking past things other people owned and making a quiet promise. Once the opportunity came, double back, and everything that was ever wanted, go get it. That promise is the entire hangar. Every car, every bike, every arcade cabinet is a receipt from a debt Rick Ross owed to a younger version of Rick Ross. Now, keep that image in your head, because across the internet, at the exact same moment, 50 Cent was telling a completely different story about that same hangar. And to understand why the counterattack lands the way it lands, you need the origin story, because none of this started yesterday. Go back to the late 2000s. 50 Cent dug up Rick Ross' past as a correctional officer and turned the revelation into a weapon so sharp the culture gave the whole era a nickname, Officer Ricky. Photos, documents, interviews, skits. 50 Cent did not just expose the history. 50 Cent built an entertainment franchise around the history. Most careers die from a hit like that. That is not an exaggeration. The industry has a graveyard full of artists who lost one public credibility fight and never recovered. Rick Ross is the exception. Rick Ross absorbed the worst version of the hit, kept releasing music, kept building the brand, and slowly turned the whole embarrassment into origin story fuel. That is why, 15 plus years later, 50 Cent still circles back. The body was never buried. The victory lap 50 Cent earned in 2009 never actually finished, and unfinished victories are the ones that keep a competitor coming back. Rick Ross knows it too. When the album questions came up during the hangar visit, Rick Ross did not flinch. 20 years in the game, 12th body of work, released on the 20th anniversary of the first one. Whatever anyone thinks of the sales, sit with the survival for a second. An artist who was declared finished in 2009 is still standing in 2026, still releasing, still touring, still filling a hangar. Their entire careers, plural, that started and ended inside that window. And here's a detail that tells you how deep the psychology runs. Rick Ross keeps the old gaming systems, the retro consoles, the arcade cabinets from childhood, not as decoration, as restoration projects. Rick Ross told Complex that almost anything can be brought back to life with the right people around it. Broken machines, dead screens, 30-year-old cabinets, all of it restorable. Now read that sentence again, but replace the machines with a career. Almost anything can be restored with the right people around it. Rick Ross was not talking about arcade games anymore. Rick Ross was describing the exact philosophy that survived Officer Ricky, survived the chart flops, survived 15 years of the most relentless troll in music history. Everything restorable, nothing finished. That is not a hobby. That is a worldview, and it is the worldview that built every square foot of the building the cameras walked through. So when 50 Cent posts the seat maps and the sales screenshots, understand what 50 Cent is actually swinging at. Not an album, a worldview. And worldviews do not show up on Billboard. Here is what the 50 Cent side of the war looks like right now. And understand, 50 Cent is not guessing. 50 Cent is running a playbook 50 Cent has been perfecting for 15 years. The attack comes in waves. Wave 1, the numbers, set in stone lands. The projections come in ugly, under 26,000, and 50 Cent is immediately posting screenshots, clowning the total, and joking that Rick Ross is about to be promoting car shows and selling chicken wings to survive. Then came the Detroit Post, a concert ticket map, 8:30 start time, sea of unsold seats glowing green, and a caption from 50 Cent. Never seen it this bad before. What is Rick Ross going to focus on? The wings. Wave 2, the lifestyle audit. This is a sharper knife. 50 Cent has been telling anyone with a camera that the boss image is a costume. 50 Cent brought up claims that Rick Ross rents out the famous Georgia state, the one everyone calls the Promised Land, on Airbnb, basically arguing that the mansion in the background of every video is not just a home, it is a revenue stream. 50 Cent clowned Rick Ross for cutting the grass on the property personally, asking why a boss with private jets is out there pushing a mower to save landscaping money. And 50 Cent keeps returning to the oldest weapon in this entire war, the correctional officer history, pointing out that to even get that job you need a clean record, then asking how the cleanest record guy in the building writes verses full of drug kingpin mythology. And Wave 3 is the coldest one, because Wave 3 is not jokes. Wave 3 is philosophy. When an interviewer asks 50 Cent why 50 Cent even bothers responding to Rick Ross, the answer should be studied. 50 Cent said, why ignore when 50 Cent could destroy the competition and create a portfolio of dead bodies? Then 50 Cent explained the real mission, sending a signal to artists that competing before you are ready is not cool. 50 Cent reminded everyone about the Triple C's album selling 4,000 copies, laughed, and compared the whole thing to a coach calling you champ on day one at the gym and you deciding you are ready for Floyd Mayweather. Now, a normal human being absorbs 3 waves like that and folds, apologizes, goes quiet, rebrands, something. Rick Ross did none of that. Rick Ross walked Complex into the Eagle's nest and started telling stories about motorcycles. And this is where the video you are watching splits from every other breakdown of this beef, because the hangar tour was not a distraction from the 50 Cent attacks. The hangar tour was a counterattack. Every single thing Rick Ross showed that camera was a direct answer to a specific 50 Cent accusation, and Rick Ross delivered every answer without saying 50 Cent's name once. Watch how it works. 50 Cent says the wealth is shaky. Rick Ross casually mentions that the internet on the jet cost $700,000, an upgrade. So the phone calls never stop from takeoff to landing. FaceTime, streaming, business calls at altitude, $500,000 to $700,000, just so the hustle never has to buffer. You do not spend that on internet if the lights are about to get cut off. 50 Cent says the cars and toys are props. Rick Ross starts pulling out receipts with stories attached. The bike spotted in a magazine, one phone call to the team, and the instruction was simple: get that bike. No inspection. No test ride. Rick Ross laughed and admitted the whole thing could have been a scam, and the response was, forget it, buy the scam. That is a man performing certainty. You do not risk scam money on camera, unless you want the world to know the risk means nothing to you. 50 Cent says the mansion lifestyle is rented theater. Rick Ross starts talking about neighbors, not rapper neighbors. Jeff Bezos is right next door, according to Rick Ross, who casually described the airspace around a hangar as a place where billionaires park their aircraft. Trump, Bezos, that is Rick Ross redrawing the map, telling the audience, my address book is not your address book. This is not a man ignoring the shots. This is a man answering every single shot in a language 50 Cent cannot ban, cannot flag, and cannot ratio. Wealth theater versus wealth theater. And while we are being honest about both sides, let me put the rumored numbers to rest, because the first 48 hours of this story were pure chaos. A claim spread everywhere that set in stone moved 2,000 copies. 2,000. Then the official Billboard report landed. Number 39 on the chart, 19,000 equivalent units. Nearly 10 times a rumor. And almost nobody who amplified the fake number came back to correct it. That is the information war Rick Ross is fighting. The lowball version travels the planet before the real version gets out of bed. Now, does that make 19,000 good? No. For a self-proclaimed biggest boss, that number is a wound, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. But there's a difference between a wounded artist and a dead one. An entire 50-cent content machine depends on you never noticing the difference. Watch the pattern in the coverage itself. Every outlet ran the same frame. Ross flexes while numbers flop. But look at what the flex actually contained. A sleeping quarters on the jet, multiple bathrooms, an interior rebuilt to Rick Ross spec, a phone call that starts before takeoff and never drops, coast to coast. Rick Ross framed the entire aircraft as a business tool, not a vacation toy, saying the jet exists to move faster between meetings, handle business, and come home the same night. Refused to charter for years, according to Rick Ross, because chartering meant the luxury belonged to somebody else. Agree with the math or not, that is a consistent philosophy. Own the asset, never rent the image of the asset. And it is the exact opposite of the accusation 50 Cent keeps making, which is that the image is rented. One of these men is telling the truth about the balance sheet. Neither camera tour settles which, but only one of them invited cameras inside the vault the same week the vault was being questioned. Whatever else that is, it is not the behavior of somebody hiding. And notice the confidence detail everybody skipped. When the $1 million motorcycle question came up, a bike rumored to be worth 7 figures, Rick Ross refused to confirm the number, just smiled and said the bike was definitely expensive. Why does that matter? Because a man performing fake wealth needs the biggest number said out loud. A man comfortable with real wealth can leave the number unsaid. Restraint is the loudest flex in the whole hangar, and it went completely over the timeline's head. Even the famous lawn story cuts both ways. 50 Cent clowned Rick Ross for cutting the grass on the Georgia estate, framing it as a billionaire too cheap to hire a crew. But anybody who has ever owned property knows the other reading. Some people mow their own land because the land is the hobby, not the burden. 50 Cent sells you the cheap reading. Rick Ross lives the other one. And the audience decides which reading to believe based on which man the audience already liked. That is not journalism. That is a loyalty test. Now, before the comment section turns into a battlefield, let me be fair in both directions, because the truth in this beef lives in the middle and nobody wants to say it. On one side, 50 Cent is not wrong about everything. The 19,000 number is real. Billboard confirmed the debut at number 39 with 19,000 units. The rumored 2,000 that spread in the first 48 hours turned out to be internet fiction, and this channel does not deal in fiction, but 19,000 is still the lowest opening of Rick Ross' career. The Detroit seat map was real too. And when you have spent 20 years telling the world you are the biggest boss, a number like that is going to get weaponized. That is the game Rick Ross chose to play at maximum volume. You cannot sell the image that loudly and then ask for privacy when the image cracks. But on the other side, 50 Cent's version has a hole in it the size of that hangar. Because if Rick Ross is actually broke, if the whole thing is Airbnb smoke and mirrors, then Rick Ross is running the most expensive bluff in hip-hop history. $700,000 of jet internet, a car held for 15 years, pulled out on camera with the Gucci-era customization still on it, a muscle car with a literal jet engine inside, reinforced with metal bars, so the frame does not crush itself. That Rick Ross admits has never once been driven. Broke people do not behave like that. Scared people do not behave like that. Even 50 Cent, in the older interviews, admitted the frustration, saying Rick Ross' last album outsold expectations, asking what exactly got destroyed. 50 Cent once said it out loud. What is destroyed? So both men are lying a little. 50 Cent pretends Rick Ross is a dead body. Rick Ross pretends the number does not sting. And the audience picks whichever lie feels better. Now here's the layer almost nobody caught. And this is the part that made me want to make this video. Buried inside the same week, under all the jokes, Rick Ross quietly slid a business offer across the table. Rick Ross looked into a camera and said Rick Ross would do business with 50 Cent mentioned seeing the renderings for 50 Cent's studio project in Shreveport. Called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to come sit at the table and present the ideas. Said men of business do not discuss the past. Read that again. 15 years of Officer Ricky jokes, court cases, baby mama drama, funerals for careers, and in the middle of the worst sales week ever, Rick Ross offered 50 Cent chair. And 50 Cent's camp answered by laughing at the ticket sales. That right, there's the whole story in one exchange. Because this beef stopped being personal a long time ago. This beef is a business model for both of them. 50 Cent needs a villain to monetize the troll content, and Rick Ross is the most reliable villain in the catalog. Rick Ross needs pressure to stay in the conversation during a down cycle, and nobody generates pressure like 50 Cent. Two rich guys arguing, and the argument itself is the product. You are not watching a war. You are watching a joint venture with insults. Even the new music angle feeds it. 50 Cent teased a project connected to Eminem and Tupac, and Rick Ross immediately fired back on camera. Pac been gone 30 years. Let the legend rest. And come on, Curtis. Drop the G-Unit sneakers. So the sneakers can flop. The sneakers will be in Costco. But notice what the comedy does. Rick Ross mentioning 50 Cent sneaker line in an interview is promotion. 50 Cent clowning set in stone to millions of followers is promotion. These two have been cross-promoting each other for a decade and a half and calling a hatred. There's one more receipt, and it is the one that tells you who Rick Ross thinks Rick Ross is, regardless of what any chart says. During the hangar tour, Rick Ross said something that flew completely under the radar, and it might be the most revealing sentence of the entire week. Talking about Set in Stone, the 12th album, 20 years after the first one, Rick Ross said this: if the goal was selling 250,000 in week one, did anyone really think the game could not have been played that way? That is not an excuse. That is a confession. Rick Ross is telling you the first week number was never the scoreboard Rick Ross was playing on. And whether you believe that or not, look at the evidence Rick Ross laid out in that hangar. Rick Ross does not measure wins in chart weeks anymore. Rick Ross measures wins in jet engines, in undefeated Madden streaks of 8 or 9 years. And being a man celebrities do not want challenge, because Rick Ross will remind them about the loss forever. The whole collection is a trophy room for a game with different rules than the one Billboard scores. And the jet engine car is the perfect symbol of all of it. A muscle car with jet fuel in the tank, wrapped in extra steel, so the horsepower does not crush the frame. That has never touched the road. On paper, that is the dumbest purchase in the building. As a statement, it is the loudest one. Rick Ross bought power Rick Ross does not even need to use. That is the entire boss persona in one vehicle. Capacity over activity. The threat of speed, parked. Now compare that to what 50 Cent is building. 50 Cent does not collect toys. 50 Cent collects leverage, film studios, television networks, ownership stakes. 50 Cent told the world in an interview that Rick Ross' problem is that nothing works for Rick Ross outside of mentioning 50 Cent. That when things get bad, mention Curtis. And the blogs come running. And the brutal part? 50 Cent is kind of right. Go look at the timeline. Album underperforms. And within days, Rick Ross is talking about 50 Cent studio loans in Shreveport, 50 Cent sneakers, 50 Cent's Eminem record. When the numbers get cold, the beef gets warm. Every single time. But flip it. 50 Cent has a studio to finance, shows to sell, a spirits brand to move, and the single most reliable engagement engine 50 Cent has ever owned is named Rick Ross. Who pulls more comments for 50 Cent than Rick Ross? Nobody. 50 Cent called the rivalry a portfolio of dead bodies, but portfolios only matter if the assets keep generating. Rick Ross is not a dead body in that portfolio. Rick Ross is a blue chip stock. That is a connect the dots moment. The beef is not 15 years of hate. The beef is 15 years of free marketing, renewed every news cycle, split between two men who understand attention economics better than the labels that signed them. And the wildest part, both of them basically admitted it on camera. 50 Cent said Rick Ross mentions 50 Cent when things get bad. Rick Ross said 50 Cent is infatuated with the lifestyle. Each man looked at the audience and told you exactly how the machine works, then kept running the machine anyway, because the machine pays. So where does that leave the hangar? It leaves the hangar as the smartest response of Rick Ross' entire career. Not because the cars prove the critics wrong. They do not. Nobody can audit a man's net worth through a YouTube tour, and pretending otherwise is dishonest. The tour is smart because it changed the subject from a number Rick Ross could not defend to a story Rick Ross could not lose. You cannot fact-check a man standing next to a bike saying, I wanted this when I had nothing, and now it is mine. 50 Cent can clown a first week total all day. Clowning a hangar full of kept promises is a much harder post to write. Rick Ross even addressed the tour troubles and the bots' accusations head-on, telling the critics that whatever the final numbers were, a party was getting thrown for those numbers anyway. Album of the Year talk. 20 years in, 12th body of work. Agree or not. That is a man refusing to let the internet set the value of the moment. Now zoom all the way out, because there's a question sitting underneath this whole story, and the question is bigger than both of these men. What is a legend of the scoreboard? 15, 20 years in the game, 12 albums, a label, restaurants, a hangar that used to be a daydream a few blocks away from where Rick Ross grew up. Somewhere along the way, the culture decided none of that counts unless the first week number agrees. One bad week and strangers who never sold anything to anyone declare the career deceased. Meanwhile, the man at the center of it is pouring premium rum on camera, telling the audience that, believe it or not, they can afford the bottle, and laughing with the confidence of someone whose scoreboard lives somewhere the charts cannot reach. And 50 Cent? 50 Cent is playing a different sport entirely. 50 Cent is not trying to outsell Rick Ross. 50 Cent is trying to outlast the very idea of Rick Ross, to make the boss image itself look rented, one joke at a time, year after year, until the image is all anyone laughs at. That is a 20-year strategy, and honestly, it is working on the timelines. Every green seat map, every chicken wing caption, every master's joke lands, because 50 Cent understands something most artists never learn. The internet does not fact-check vibes. The internet repeats them. But here's what the internet missed this week, while it was laughing. Rick Ross never defended the number. Not once. Rick Ross defended the meaning. That is a completely different skill, and it might be the only reason this career survives a chart week that has ended lesser artists. The tours get rebooked. The car show keeps growing. The hangar keeps filling. And the man keeps collecting, because the collection was never about the audience in the first place. Remember the words. Me at peace. Me time. Somewhere to go alone. You cannot flop your way out of a room like that, and you cannot troll your way into one. So the real answer to the question everyone keeps screaming, who won this round, is uncomfortable. They both did, and neither of them will ever admit it. Because admitting it ends the most profitable Cold War hip-hop has ever seen. Now the floor is yours, and I already know this comment section is about to be a crime scene. Is the hangar proof that Rick Ross is untouchable, or is a hangar the most expensive distraction ever built? Is 50 Cent exposing a fraud, or is 50 Cent milking a 15-year-old beef because nothing else trend harder? And the big one, does a first week number mean anything for an artist 20 years deep, or is the culture just addicted to funerals? Drop the take below. No fence-sitting. Pick a side and defend the side like rent is due. If this breakdown gave you a new angle on a beef you thought you understood, hit the like button so the algorithm knows this one mattered. Subscribe and turn on every notification, because the next chapter of this war is already loading, and when it drops, you're going to want to be here before the blogs touch it. Share this with the one friend who still argues about Ross versus 15 at 2 in the morning. 20 years, 12 albums, one hangar, one number, two men who cannot quit each other. And somewhere in Miami tonight, there's a jet with no shoes on it, a jet engine inside a car that has never been driven, and a man sitting alone in the middle of everything he ever wanted, completely at peace, while the entire internet argues about whether the man is finished. That is not a flop. That is not a funeral. That is the eagle's nest. And the door just closed. I will see you in the next one. Keep your eyes on the ones the internet keeps calling finished. Mark it.